Hi, folks. Bernie Higgins here. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about waste and recycling fires. These have been around for generations, certainly as long ago when I joined the fire service way back in 1980. We were going to waste and recycling fires. They've got worse. We seem to have just settled for the fact that we're always going to have them. And I think it's time for a rethink. And hopefully, my presentation will explain why. Right. A little bit about me before we go any further. That's me. I've got an honours degree in psychology. I'm a member of the Institute of Fire Engineers. I've also got the NEBOSH diploma. So my career history, 33 years in London Fire Brigade, fantastic career in a great organisation. And I ended as a Deputy Assistant Commissioner, which was very fortunate. And head of Special Operations Group, which was a really exciting post. I went on to do some other stuff with National Resilience before I became the Director of Training at the Fire Service College in the UK, a place called Morton in the Marsh in Gloucestershire. When I left there, I then went on to become a Director of the Fire Industry Association, which is the biggest trade association, I think now in the world, but certainly in Europe, with over 1,000 members, member companies. Ranging right across the fire industry spectrum. And I also run my own health and safety consultancy business because actually safety of people, safety of the public, safety of responders is something I'm really passionate about. A little bit about the agenda for today. We're going to talk a bit about waste fire costs and causes. We're going to have a look at fire prevention. I particularly want to major on response, and then I'll touch on Mosmark Marine 3 fire, which is a wetting agent, and I'll do that right at the end. So the costs of waste and recycling plant fires. By the way, all of the pictures you can see are from incidents on waste and recycling plants, mainly UK and America. But we can see the costs are not just always the financial ones. The effects on the local community health. So you often have, when you're building a licensed site, you have to have due regard for local sensitive receptors. These can be people, wildlife, plants, etc., that may be downwind of any fire incident, or indeed of any spillage or any hazardous materials incident on the plant, and therefore may be affected by any release of noxious substances such as smoke from a fire and the products of the combustion. And very often when you have one of these fires, they release airborne toxins, which will have a massive effect on local health, particularly anyone who's vulnerable, if they have breathing difficulties, etc., respiratory illnesses, will have a massive impact, as well as those other sensitive receptors, which I just talked about. Of course, it'll have an effect on climate, any pollution that goes up into the atmosphere. So the next 2 points are linked, really. They do release quite a lot of pollution because these are waste products, very often plastic, very often giving some fairly noxious gases that go up into the atmosphere. That has a long-term knock-on effect on climate and a shorter-term effect on local pollution, which can affect the biodiversity and the microclimates locally to waste and recycling plants. So there's quite a lot of damage done there that's not really picked up when we talk about things like costs of fire. And of course, there's business continuity for the plant itself. So all the time they've got the fire service on site, all the time that they're having to change operations to because they've got the fire, that's going to affect their output and their business, perhaps having to close the site while the fire's extinguished, or at least have a partial opening of the business or partial closure, all of which will affect the amount of income. And last but by no means least, and I can say this quite passionately as someone who's spent many an unhappy hour at a waste or recycling plant, just pouring water onto very deep-seated fires in the hope that once we start raking it out, we might actually get the fire out. These fires can last for days, weeks, in a couple of cases I'm aware of, even months. Where you've got fire service resources on site. And of course, if they're there, they're tied up at something, they can't be doing their normal day-to-day activity, which is prevention, protection and response, keeping their communities safe, and their training, of course. So it has a knock-on impact right the way across. So these costs are not just the ones you might expect. Of course, there are costs. The number of waste and recycling plant fires is growing globally year on year. So if we take the US and the UK, the cost of landfill fires in the US, look at those figures, $755 million to $1.5 billion. And I picked those up of an American environmental agency site. And those include the costs of risk controls, such as fire protection systems, detection, etc. So that the costs aren't just the fire in those, but they're still huge. And when we look at the annual cost of waste and recycling fires in the UK, for a much smaller country, it's equally eye-watering at £18.6 million. And again, this has come from National Fire Chiefs Council in the UK and elsewhere. And these figures include the costs of the fire service response. And as I say, having that response on site for quite some time, sometimes a huge number of fire appliances and vehicles, specialist vehicles on site early on, whittling down gradually to a smaller number, but still there for days and days, as I say, up to months sometimes afterwards, which all costs the local community and that fire service money, ultimately, and the taxpayer money, ultimately. So the causes are interesting. Disposal of lithium-ion batteries are probably the biggest single cause for the increase in waste and recycling fires, and they certainly have increased year on year. I think I read 2022 in the United States there was quite a jump, and that was their worst year in terms of the number of reported waste and recycling fires that they attended, the fire services out there. So lithium-ion batteries are a big cause. They're in everything from vapes, mobile phones, laptops, and handheld electrical devices, DIY tools, etc. And very often people don't think, particularly you can see the number of the smaller batteries spilling out of that plastic cup. People don't often think about they don't think twice about throwing those away in the rubbish. Well, actually, any lithium-ion battery, regardless whether it's a small AA or whether it's a large laptop battery or even bigger, the car batteries, if they get damaged or they're subject to heating or shock, they can overheat, go into thermal runaway and cause a fire. And even those small batteries you can see there are capable of starting fires in waste and rubbish, particularly if it's smaller sort of waste that's or paper and flammables that are all around that battery because it's been thrown out in household waste. So they're a big cause, and often cause of fires in waste trucks, which I'll talk about in a moment, as well as waste and recycling plants. Self-heating waste bales has always been a problem. Waste, when it's very tightly compacted, can self-heat and will eventually overheat and ignite, and that fire will get enough oxygen in it to get going and cause quite a deep-seated fire. And these are the ones that are really tough to put out when they're deep-seated in bales or in high piles of waste. So for that reason, certainly in the UK and I believe in America, we urge licensed sites and all sites, in fact, to keep the size and height of bales down to a recognised number so that we don't get so much of this self-heating that causes catastrophic fires. Arson, of course, will always be an issue. Sometimes back in the day, it's been children playing nearby and that can be a cause. Very often it's on illegal sites where people have illegally dumped a load of waste and it's built up, and then someone's decided the best way to deal with it is deliberately set light to it and leave it. And of course that's every bit as dangerous, because the unlicensed sites, the illegal waste sites as I put them, very often the waste isn't controlled what's in there. No one knows. You can't put a person on top to actually direct some water down into the fire. So you're left with just trying to pour water and hope that it seeps through and penetrates into the deep-seated fire. Climate change inevitably is a problem, and this is where that vicious cycle of you put pollution into the climate over a long period, it causes, of course, that climate change. Climate change means longer, drier periods in some countries, and therefore that long, dry period gives rise to an increased risk of waste fires, where that waste is just out in the sun, getting hot, warming up, and then ultimately perhaps over temperature and igniting. And the last, but by no means least cause, is equipment or machinery. Sometimes if it's faulty, sometimes can catch light itself and then spreads, but sometimes can just simply be that heat source next to very hot waste that's been out in the sun and causes ignition. So what about fire prevention? Because this is key. And again, one of my big things for a number of these sorts of incidents is we need the public's help. We need people's help. So reporting illegal waste dumping sites. If you see them and you see someone's dumped waste, don't leave it, don't wait, report it. Report it either to the local police or to an environment agency or your local environment people. 9 times out of 10, they will come out and deal with it and try and make sure it's removed. But you certainly need it to be reported so that people can keep an eye on it and stop it from becoming a real problem and someone adding to it and then deliberately setting light to it. Public awareness around batteries is going to be a biggie for me. Getting householders to separate batteries out. You can see that there are places that have these separate battery bins, for want of a better term, where you can put your old batteries, your old AA, AAA batteries, and what I used to call transistor radio. Goodness me, I'm old. Radio batteries. That all goes out, can be separated from general rubbish and then separated again at the waste and recycling plant. It just reduces the likelihood that that's going to get damaged by some sort of grab hand or grabbing machinery and start go into thermal runaway and start a fire. So that public information campaign would be really helpful about separate your batteries out from general rubbish. And then on the waste and recycling plants, if you've got those separate collection, make sure the batteries are kept very separate from other flammables and other waste. As I say, the third point, making sure that highly flammable rubbish and toxic material is stored away from other rubbish and sources of ignition. Now, in the UK, the licence sites are regulated by the Environment Agency and the Health and Safety Executive. So they will go around and check that happens and make sure. There are still some sites that don't always fully comply, sadly, but most of the really big licensed sites certainly do. And then, of course, in terms of fire prevention, you can have your on-site teams, and there are not. Some of the bigger sites have these. I'd like to see them more widespread, where you have teams of people who are on site, not just to do a response and put a fire out, but actually to work alongside on-site fire detection with thermal image cameras, maybe even fixed fire detection in the sort of flame detectors or smoke detector in the area, beam detection that can very early on detect a fire and either alert the site so that they can put water on it, or maybe have a fixed installation that actually can work as well. But I'd say you still need people. You might need people to use probes, temperature probes into bales to make sure they're not overheating. All of that will help to stop a fire in the first place, and ensuring that good separation alongside good fire detection, good fire suppression, good on-site response, which I'll talk about in a minute, goes to ensure that a small fire stays small and doesn't grow. For new waste and recycling sites, wherever they are, designing inherent safety systems and features, so safety integrated systems that work together. there's a hierarchy of controls on the health and safety in the UK website, and top of that for high hazard process risks such as waste and recycling plants, inherent safety within the system designed in before it's built is number one. After that, it's elimination of the risk. Can you do things in a different way to eliminate the risk? Can you substitute the risk? But then we usually, for waste and recycling plants that are already built, we look at engineering controls like those fire protection systems, or administrative controls such as the firefighting team, the on-site team, procedures and policies, which I will talk about in just a minute. For all the sites, we need to make sure that health and safety and fire safety are the number one priority, for all the reasons that I said earlier about not just the pollution, the cost to the local community, but also for business continuity and for making sure that fire and rescue service responses are used where they're most needed to do the most good to keep people safe, rather than spending weeks and weeks, possibly months, pouring water onto a site. And of course, that on-site prevention response team, which I will keep going back to, absolutely key. You can see in the picture there, there's a waste collection vehicle on fire. Not an unusual thing. When one of these actually goes up in flames, it usually costs the local authority or the company that's responsible around £100,000 to replace, because they usually do have to be replaced because of the heat damage, etc., and the damage to the machinery itself. And of course, that ultimately that cost all goes back to the taxpayer. So anything we can do to reduce the occurrence of waste fires, either in vehicles or on sites, is surely to be welcomed by everyone. The waste fire response teams. Number one, it's all about recruitment, isn't everything? If you recruit the right people, if you get your recruitment right, you will have a good team who will do their jobs diligently. They'll be competent and they'll enhance your business. So recruitment is key, and you need to consider there what sort of knowledge and skills you want from your on-site team, so that they're competent in fire detection on site, fire prevention on site, and then using the on-site equipment to suppress a fire, keep it in its smaller stages while they alert the fire service, or an on-site fire response that can do and keep a small fire small, keep it small, so that when the fire service turns up, they're not going to be there for a long time, and actually your business gets back to where it needs to be, a maximum output, as quickly as possible. Part of all of that, of course, you do need to have on-site training in whatever the plan may be. So you need an on-site emergency plan, and that's a must for any site. On-site emergency plans, training to those plans and exercising those plans, making sure, if you can, that the local fire and rescue service, local emergency service, are fully involved, fully understand your local plan and are engaged with it, so that they can see what you're trying to do before they arrive and can then complement those actions. But also they can offer you some very good advice and guidance on what works and what may not work, before you have to, hopefully never do, but if you do have to test it out for real. So on-site emergency plans, testing, training and exercising, absolutely crucial. There's a plethora of guidance out there. I've listed some to the right of the picture. The one I would recommend is the Waste Industry Safety and Health Forum, which gives some excellent guidance on safe waste and recycling plants and energy from waste plants. Really, really good. You'll usually find your local environment agency, your local environment regulator will have an involvement. Your local fire and rescue service absolutely 100% will be able to advise and guide and help, because they don't really want to be coming out to incidents where they're going to be spending weeks and weeks trying to put out deep-seated fire. And the two at the top, of course, the National Fire Protection Association, which is American, and the National Fire Chiefs Council, they both issue guidance as well on fire prevention and measures on waste and recycling plants to keep these fires down. So there's a whole lot of guidance out there if anyone needs to see what they can do to make their plant as safe as possible from fire. Just a little bit about Mosmark Marine 3 Fire. You can see it's unique, it's biodegradable. firefighting product. It's a wetting agent. It's added into water, doesn't need any special extra equipment for fire service. Um, it's PFAS and fluorine free, and has been independently tested. The key here for waste fires is that Marine 3 actually adds to the penetration abilities of water. So you don't need quite so much water, but you actually penetrate into deep-seated fires much quicker with a good effect. So early use of Marine 3, and I would recommend that for the on-site teams to have a wetting agent such as Marine 3 available so that they can get into those deep-seated as soon as they see there's some overheating, and they can cool it down very quickly and stop a fire happening. Can be used as a fire retardant, so you can apply Marine 3 if you know that something's overheating before it catches fire. And also if you've seen the forecast and there's a long period of hot, dry weather, you may wish to put some Marine 3 over the top fairly regularly, just to act as a fire retardant and stop your plant being affected by fire. Very, very effective. There's the 4 things that Marine 3 is good for: increased penetration, reduce runoff, which of course fire services have to deal with. Fire services have to deal with the runoff and stop pollution getting into the watercourses if they can. Not always easy when you've got huge amounts of water required. The fire you can see in front of you is in waste tyres, and you can see the black, horrible toxic smoke. All of the water runoff from that will be polluted and therefore needs to be captured. If you use Marine 3, and I'll show on the next screen a QR code where you can look at some of the tests. One of the things that struck me was how quickly that thick black smoke turns white once Marine 3 has been added as a wetting agent into the firefighting water and applied. Works really, really well. There's the QR code that I was talking about, and you can see a number of tests that took place at the Fire Service College. A car fire, some burning tyres, that's well worth looking at. The fuel fire, straw fire, and also a timber crib fire. So you can see just how well Marine 3 performs, and it's all of the footage is weighed against water only, so a good chance to see how it works. Great quote from Walt Disney: we can talk about these things all we like. Actually, it's time to stop talking and begin doing. For me, all of this is all about safety. It's all about keeping people and the public, our responders, as safe as possible. There will always be fires, but the more we can do together to prevent them, to stop them from occurring in the first place, the better we will be for the environment, the better, the safer our public will be. And actually, the more the fire service can get on with their jobs of prevention and protection rather than being out responding. Thank you very much, folks. You can see my contact details. Happy for you to contact and take whatever questions you wish to ask. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Bernie, for another Fire by Live instalment. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And for this year's presentation, you tackled waste and recycling fires, a very important topic. And I always feel like we can always rely on you to actually bring these types of topics, bring the awareness to these types of topics. And so just to kind of delve straight back into it, obviously you mentioned lithium-ion batteries being one of the biggest causes of fires in waste and recycling plants in 2022. So do you think that these types of plant fires will have kind of a dramatic increase and the danger, of toxicity in the coming years when the full extent of, disposable vapes and kind of scooters and other lithium-ion battery powered objects is actually realised? How can we actually attempt to mitigate this risk a little bit?
Well, thanks, Rebecca, and it's great to be here. But there's a couple of things we can do, really. Yes, I do believe, number one, I do believe they will go up. My biggest concern is actually around electric vehicle batteries. They last around about 10 years, and they're the most of the cost of the vehicle. And I'm really concerned that people buy a second-hand electric vehicle and then think, oh, the battery is going to go, I need to get another one. They'll just go and dispose of the battery wherever, or possibly even try and dispose of it in normal waste. I hope they wouldn't. I hope they take it somewhere specialist. And that they will cause big fires. So there's going to be more and more lithium-ion battery fires, I suspect, whether that's the bigger ones from car batteries and vehicle batteries, all the way to the very, very small ones. And as you say, vaping still seems to be quite a craze. So until we get something else, they're going to be a risk. As I say, I think it needs public awareness. I think we do a lot of recycling in the UK and elsewhere. We have different bins for paper, for plastics, for tins, and for general household rubbish. We probably need one that says batteries, and it's a smaller one that only ever gets collected once it's full, and you just take it away. I think that would be a very useful enhancement, not just for the public, but also for the waste companies who are risking taking that in, because when the battery goes in the back of, say, a dust cart, if it does get mangled up, that's when it's going to go into thermal runaway and start that fire.
Definitely, and I hope that with the kind of in the UK anyway, the banning of disposable vapes, I think that's coming into fruition over the next year or so. So that should hopefully start to kind of minimise that, although a small aspect of it, but still. And just to play slight devil's advocate, obviously I completely agree with everything you're saying, but I think when I think of my local waste plant, I believe there's obviously there's a separate bin, like you said, a battery bin, for batteries, for electronics, but obviously if just one of those small, a AA battery, for example, becomes lit from, I don't know, whatever, like you said, local kids or something, and that goes into thermal runaway, is there more danger of it being surrounded by all these other lithium-ion batteries, all these other objects, as opposed to in a kind of generic bin? Obviously the risks are more likely in a generic bin, so it's kind of a double-edged sword, really.
I mean, Rebecca, you're absolutely right. I mean, because as the fire heats and spreads, the other batteries will eventually go into thermal runaway. So you do risk that. But if it's segregated from or separated from all the other flammables, and you keep it somewhere, whether it's in a sort of purpose-built, brick-built building or something, there are ways of containing that going forward. So you can keep that fire, even if it does catch light, you can keep it small. It would be my hope, rather than have all of the batteries going to thermal runaway. I don't think it's that often at the moment that's happened, but there's certainly a risk of that. And I would suggest keeping them separate, keeping them in a purpose-built, secure, small storage facility on site, so that if you do have a fire in there, it's not going to go anywhere else. It's going to stay small, stay in a small space.
And I suppose if it's held in a separate storage place, you can have a different type of extinguishing agent, a different type of suppression technology that can contain the fire, even if it's water mist, for example. And just in terms of obviously legislation that's either currently in place, or, like you said, legislation regulation to come in through councils with separate bins, how is this looking when it comes to like the evolution of standards to help better these types of scenarios?
Well, I think as we learn more about that, it's relatively early days. We've had lithium-ion batteries, goodness me, for years, since I was a child. We've had, we went over to Duracell, and I remember that. Oh wow, it lasts longer, except you can recharge it. So we've had them for a long, long time now, but we're just learning about some of these risks, and I think we're going to need to spend a little bit longer learning what the risks are and to fully understand them. And then I expect standards to start really kicking in to say, well, actually, these are a fire risk, therefore this is what you need to do. This, again, there's great guidance. The Fire Protection Association and others do great guidance on charging of vehicles, etc., in and around buildings. And some of that may easily be transferable over to waste fires as well, in terms of how you can keep things separate, and how you can have newer, perhaps more innovative ways of dealing with the fire once it does occur.
Definitely, and in terms of vehicle fires as well, I think we've come a little bit of a way now that we've got the infrastructure that's starting to come in to charge these vehicles. My nan has a hybrid car, and she still has to take out the battery, take it into the house, and charge it up and everything inside. Whereas now the vehicles, you can get the actual charging ports, so they still remain separate. You're not at risk of having a house fire, for example. You're dealing with one fire as opposed to the spread, which is similar to what you said in terms of separating the batteries out. And also obviously, on the topic of kind of prevention and the future outlook, how crucial is, I suppose, industry-wide collaboration in addressing these types of issues in plant fires? Are there any initiatives or partnership, for example, that are currently in place to tackle these types of problems?
Partnership for me is always the way forward. I don't think any single agency, the fire and rescue services, of course, are well versed in how they extinguish and respond, but actually they're not necessarily the experts in waste fires, neither should they be. There's plenty of people within the waste regulatory industry. I mentioned in the UK, Health and Safety Executive and the Environment Agency, who are the enforcing authority for that, for licensed premises. But I do believe it's a partnership, and that involves the police for the illegal stuff as well. You need to get the people in the room together. It's only when you get the people together, working together, thinking together, that you actually develop these more innovative and more effective solutions. So there has been some stuff in the UK. As I said, the waste industry safety and health company Wish do some great guidance, and they've worked with the Fire and Rescue Service at National Fire Chiefs Council in the UK, who have a lead for waste fires. So this is on the community risk register of most fire and rescue services. Waste fires are on their risk register as one of their top 6 risks for a number of the bigger fire services. In fact, for almost all of them, they've got it as a risk. Most of them have got it as top 6. So they will work in partnership with waste regulators, waste companies, police, and other interested stakeholders. And I believe that's always going to be the future. You do need to get people together, and you need industry as well, Rebecca. You need the solutions need to come from industry, who can develop stuff and tell you what's needed. As once they've understood the problem, industry can be incredibly useful in helping to develop solutions.
100%. I think collaboration is probably one of the most important aspects of the fire industry as a whole. I mean, we're very much in a different era of firefighting, where the modern firefighter has to tackle and have knowledge of all types of fires, because the way the world has changed, with climate change, with all of that, it's a completely different world. So collaboration across different regions, across different bodies and entity standards body, definitely something that's imperative. And just lastly, obviously, how can we get the word out? Obviously, you mentioned about getting the word out to the public. How can we do that? How can we get this campaign started? How can we emphasize the separation of batteries in households?
But for me, through things like this, Rebecca, I think these are so important, because this goes out, International Fire Bar goes out not just in one country, but a number of countries internationally. And I'd love to see people picking up on this and saying, let's start those campaigns. Fire services do campaigns around fires. I'm working with the Fire Industry Association and other stakeholders, the Fire Protection Association, National Fire Chiefs Council, around lithium-ion batteries, the risks, and and how we can prevent those. This will be a tiny piece of that work, because there are other bits as well in terms of vehicle fires, vehicle charging, because there's a life risk associated, particularly if people have got scooters and stuff that they're charging indoors. But this is a very important part as well. So for me, it's about getting those public awareness campaigns out there. Whatever media works best. Sometimes it's a TV campaign. Other times I don't know enough about it to speak with any great clarity on it. But I'd love to see social media campaigns aimed at particularly younger people and people likely to vape and do that kind of stuff, just to make them aware of that their vapes, if they're carelessly disposed, can cause a fire, whether that's a wildfire because they've thrown it down in open land, or whether they've just put it in the rubbish. So the more we can do to get the word out there, Rebecca, through initiatives like International Fire by Live and like those collaborative working groups, the better. It's all about public safety.
Well, we're always happy to help get the message out there, Bernie. So I appreciate those nice words to end on. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to catch up. And if you'd like to check out Bernie's other presentation sessions, just look at our on-demand feature of the platform, or to find out more about the Fire Industry Association and the work that they're doing, you can check out our exhibitor page as well. Thank you, Bernie. And I'm sure until next time, I'll see you soon.
Definitely. I'll see you soon, Rebecca.